Remember when that Dallas office tower that was being demolished just wouldn't come down?
Yeah, our biggest worry was just watching
Hung
it.
there.
Have you ever thought that the demolition of a building is just the end of an old structure? But in reality, it's only the beginning of something new, or at least that's what is expected. Although demolition experts meticulously plan every detail, the reality doesn't always follow the script. Sometimes, what should be a controlled collapse turns into a spectacle of total chaos. Imagine a flower factory that was supposed to collapse into a cloud of dust, but instead, it took an unexpected turn, sliding over its own roof. Or a giant silo that, instead of falling in its place, began to tilt dangerously towards a cultural center, putting everything around it at risk. Today, we will explore some of the most disastrous demolitions in history. Get ready to see how even the most meticulous plans can skid when pressure becomes an unexpected factor. Are you ready to witness the most chaotic moments of building demolitions? Let's find out. The Dallas Leaning Tower disaster. The demolition of a building should be a controlled process, but what happened in Dallas, Texas in 2020 broke all the rules. An 11-story office building meant to disappear to make way for a massive $2.5 billion project ended up creating an unexpected phenomenon. The Dallas Leaning Tower. The city had planned a development that would include housing, offices, and entertainment centers, but what they didn't expect was for their old office tower to do the exact opposite of what was planned. Thousands of people gathered to watch the building fall, but what happened was much stranger than anyone could have imagined. The plan was simple: place explosives at key points to make the building collapse in a controlled manner. The first detonations shattered windows and dust began to rise, but there was a critical mistake. The elevator shaft was constructed with much stronger materials than the rest of the structure, which prevented it from collapsing like the rest of the building. What remained after the explosion was a leaning tower, a spectacle that quickly became a viral attraction. The building partially collapsed, but the elevator shaft tilted to one side, creating an unstable tower that workers couldn't approach to finish the demolition. Residents in the area even created a petition to preserve the tower as a new tourist attraction. However, after a few days, the tower was finally demolished with a wrecking ball. The failed demolition in Canary, Turkey. Sometimes, even the best-planned demolitions can go completely wrong. In Canary, Turkey, an epic incident left witnesses stunned when an old flower factory, built in 1928, didn't collapse as expected, but instead decided to roll in a way no one imagined. The building had been abandoned after the factory closed, and although its foundation was already quite deteriorated, it was still waiting for the final explosion that would bring it down. But when the explosives were detonated on the remaining side of the structure, the result was completely unpredictable. Instead of collapsing inward, the building began to spin.
Choreographed explosive charges. Well, a building in Turkey was dancing to a different tune this weekend.
And rolled over its own roof. Eyewitnesses, completely incredulous, couldn't believe what they were seeing. The massive structure dangerously moved towards a row of nearby apartments, causing panic among the residents. Fortunately, no one was injured, and the surrounding apartments remained intact, but the image of that factory rolling over its roof became one of the most talked about videos on social media. The silo disaster in Denmark. In Denmark, a giant 170-foot-high silo was scheduled to be demolished near one of the city's most iconic structures, the library and cultural center. With everything under control, demolition experts set the charges and cleared a safety zone, ensuring the library was outside the impact area. However, the plan didn't go as expected. When the explosions were detonated, most of the silo began to collapse as planned, but one side of the structure didn't fall evenly, causing the silo to dangerously tilt towards the cultural center. The impact was devastating. The heavy structure crashed into the building, causing significant damage in several key areas: administrative offices, archives, and even a music school located in the same complex. Witnesses, visibly shocked, watched as at the moment of impact, books and papers flew through the air, scattering throughout the library. The incident, which quickly became local news, led to an investigation. After reviewing the facts, it was found that the explosives had not been placed correctly, causing the silo to fall in the wrong direction. Fortunately, despite the magnitude of the accident, no one was injured. This mistake, which nearly resulted in a tragedy, underscores the importance of meticulous planning and precise execution in demolition projects. Demolitions in rural areas. Risks and realities. Although large demolitions in cities require professional teams with explosives and advanced machinery, demolitions in rural areas have a different approach. In many cases, private property owners in less urbanized areas take on the responsibility of demolishing structures on their own. Often, these owners are ordinary people, such as farmers or small business owners, who choose not to hire specialized companies to save money. However, this decision doesn't mean the process is any less risky. While the scale of the structures is different, demolition in rural areas still requires careful planning and a lot of precision. The use of heavy machinery, such as excavators and backhoes, becomes the primary tool for destroying smaller buildings, and any mistake can have serious consequences. Even without large explosives, improvised demolitions are not without danger. It is essential that even demolition projects in rural areas are carried out professionally to avoid unexpected accidents. The following incident is a clear example of how things can go wrong even when explosives are not used. The collapse of the chimney in Pell City, Alabama. In Pell City, Alabama, a group of workers was attempting to demolish an old chimney, but they didn't have explosives. Instead of following the standard protocol for controlled demolition, they opted to use an excavator to slowly remove the bricks and foundation.
Tim Pfeiffer was inside an excavator working to bring down the smokestack at Avondale Mills.
Everything seemed to be going well as the machine operator removed the bricks until the weight of the structure became unsustainable, causing the chimney to start collapsing. At first, the chimney fell in a controlled manner, but it quickly changed direction. In an unexpected twist, the structure began to lean towards the excavator, putting the operator in an extremely dangerous situation. The operator, aware of the danger, tried to turn the excavator to move away, but the chimney fell onto the machine, crushing it under tons of bricks and debris. The spectators, terrified, rushed to check on the operator, fearing the worst. Miraculously, he emerged from the cabin visibly shaken and bruised, but alive. Drone footage later showed how a significant part of the chimney pierced the excavator cabin, invading the space where the operator had been. Thanks to the robustness of the machine and the intact structure of the cabin, the operator survived what could have otherwise been a fatal accident. This incident has become one of the most viral demolition videos on the internet, demonstrating how even the simplest tasks can become dangerous without proper planning. This type of situation serves as a reminder of the importance of safety and preparation, even in smaller and less complex projects. Demolition of the clothing factory in Průh, Czech Republic. In the city of Průh, Czech Republic, there was an old building that once housed a clothing factory. After the company went bankrupt, the building was abandoned for several years until the decision was made to demolish it to make way for new developments. The job was assigned to a specialized demolition team that took care of all the calculations and the precise placement of explosives. With the crowd watching from a safe distance, cameras began recording the anticipated collapse of the structure. When the charges were activated, the explosions detonated from left to right, achieving a perfect and controlled collapse of the building. The structure descended exactly as planned, without deviating in any direction. The audience, impressed by the precise execution, couldn't believe how well everything had gone. However, what seemed like a flawless demolition soon took an unexpected turn. At one point, a chunk of debris was ejected with incredible speed from the center of the explosion. This fragment, the size of a softball, crossed the air through the trees and passed dangerously close to the heads of several spectators, including the cameraman who was filming. Although the demolition team had taken the necessary precautions, it turned out that the safety distance was not sufficient to avoid the impact of flying debris at high speed. Fortunately, the incident did not result in any serious injuries. However, the proximity of the debris to the spectators was a sobering reminder of the unforeseen risks that can arise even in the most controlled demolitions. The scene went viral, highlighting how unpredictable the demolition process can be, even with all safety protocols in place. The uncontrolled collapse of a building in China. In a shocking video filmed in China, a high-rise apartment building was scheduled to be demolished to make way for new urban developments. The plan was for the building to crumble into two halves, but the only thing that went right was the beginning of the demolition. When the charges were detonated, the left half of the building started falling as expected. However, something went wrong. Instead of continuing downward, the structure stopped abruptly and then changed direction, falling sideways rather than toward the center of the open space. The right half of the building also began to collapse, but its fall was even more erratic. It descended a short distance before stopping, tilting dangerously and swaying to one side. The demolition team faced one of the most dangerous situations that can occur in a project of this type. The building, which was over 20 stories tall, caused collateral damage to other nearby structures and wreaked havoc on vehicles parked in the area. The uncontrolled fall of the first half left the second part unstable, forcing the team to come up with a new strategy to bring down the structure safely without endangering workers or people nearby. Fortunately, after a tense and dangerous operation, the building was eventually demolished without any injuries being reported. However, this event serves as a clear reminder that large-scale demolitions can be unpredictable, and even when everything seems under control, there is always a margin of error that can have serious consequences. The failure of the Mad River Power Plant. Demolition, Springfield, Ohio. In Springfield, Ohio, the Mad River Power Plant had been inactive for over 80 years. Determined to clear the land for future development, the demolition team was hired to bring down several structures on the site, including a 275-foot-tall chimney that loomed over the landscape. The demolition was carefully planned, and the team placed the explosives precisely to ensure the chimney would fall in a controlled direction. With a countdown announcing the start of the event on November 10, 2010, the charge was detonated. The tower began to fall toward the designated spot. However, something went wrong. The chimney started to fall in the wrong direction. Instead of falling in a controlled manner, the structure struck an active high-voltage power line that supplied electricity to thousands of nearby residents. The video shows spectators running to get away from the downed power lines that had fallen across the road. The accident caused local chaos as the 12 500-volt lines were destroyed, interrupting the power supply to thousands of homes in the area. The parent company of Ohio Edison, First Energy, sued for damages exceeding $19 million due to the service disruption. Fortunately, despite the magnitude of the disaster, there were no victims or injuries in the incident. However, the impact was significant both for the community and for those responsible for the demolition,
The power lines coming down like dominoes, like you could hear a snap, 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 snap real fast coming out.
leaving important lessons about safety in demolition projects, especially in areas with nearby critical infrastructure. Failed demolition in Shenyang, China, the demolition ball that didn't do its job. China is known for its rapid urban growth, and in cities like Shenyang, building demolition is an integral part of the process. On April 8, 2014, a demolition team was called in to take down a landmark building, the Shenyang to make way for new constructions. In such a densely populated area, every detail of the demolition had to be calculated precisely to avoid damage to surrounding buildings. Instead of using explosives, the team opted for a demolition ball, a traditional method that, while effective, requires meticulous control. However, the plan did not go as expected. While the ball knocked down much of the structure, one half of the building remained intact, leading to the perception of a complete failure among spectators. Despite the surprise, some reports suggested that leaving half of the building standing might have been part of the strategy to avoid debris affecting nearby buildings. However, this explanation remains uncertain. What is clear is that, fortunately, there were no victims, and the demolition, although peculiar, was carried out without any major incidents. A reminder of how demolitions in densely urbanized areas require not only skill, but also a high level of planning and precision. The collapse of a chimney in Alabama, an unexpected demolition accident. On May 22, 2013, a team was assigned to demolish an old industrial chimney that had become obsolete at a factory in Alabama. Instead of using explosives, which are often costly and complicated, the team decided to employ a more economical method, gradually removing the base of the chimney with an excavator and using a truck to bring it down in a controlled manner. However, when the chimney started to fall, things didn't go as planned. Instead of leaning towards the truck, the chimney fell sideways, dangerously landing on a parked car and nearly crushing one of the workers who was close to the impact zone. Fortunately, the worker was able to move away in time, and although the damage was purely material, this incident highlighted the risks inherent in the method used. This type of demolition, without explosives, is common in smaller structures due to lower costs and less complex logistics. However, as demonstrated in this case, unforeseen issues are always a possibility. Despite the scares, no one was injured, but the accident served as a lesson about the importance of anticipating all angles in every demolition, even in smaller-scale projects. The failed implosion of the Clarion Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. The Clarion Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada was a 200-room hotel that opened in 1970. Despite its prime location in the city of casinos, the hotel never achieved the commercial success expected due to its outdated design and lack of distinction compared to other establishments. In an attempt to revitalize the area, the decision was made to demolish the building. On February 10, 2015, the Clarion Hotel was demolished using a controlled implosion, a process that turned the 14-story structure into a pile of rubble. Everything seemed to be going as planned, but when the dust settled, something surprising happened. The elevator shaft remained standing. The implosion, which involved 1,100 tons of TNT, was not enough to destroy this part of the structure, leaving the spectators stunned by the unexpected failure of the demolition. The problem was significant. 12 hours after the explosion, a crane was needed to finally demolish the elevator shaft, a task that required several efforts before the last remnant of the structure hit the ground. Although the final result was as expected, this incident emphasizes the complexity of controlled demolitions and how a small error in calculations can leave part of the building intact. Despite the inconvenience and setbacks, the most important thing is that no one was injured. This event serves as a reminder to demolition professionals that, although explosions may look spectacular, absolute control remains essential to avoid any structure being left out of place, or worse yet, causing collateral damage. The incomplete collapse of the Silver Dome in Pontiac, Michigan. The Silver Dome, located in Pontiac, Michigan, was for decades one of the region's most iconic structures. With a capacity of 83,000 people, it was home to the Detroit Lions and hosted historic events like the FIFA World Cup, WrestleMania III, and NBA games. Inaugurated in 1975, the stadium became an icon, But after the opening of Ford Field in Detroit, the Silver Dome was abandoned and left purposeless. After several years of disuse, in 2017, the new owners decided that the best option was to demolish it and use the 199-acre plot for new projects. The demolition plan began with a controlled implosion in December 2017, aimed at bringing down the top section of the stadium. However, things didn't go as expected. Although the explosives detonated and generated an impressive cloud of smoke, the structure remained intact. The demolition company explained that about a tenth of the explosives failed to work properly, which caused the structure not to fall as planned. While the responsible parties were confident that it would eventually fall, they couldn't say when. To resolve this issue, the demolition team returned the next day, using a manual approach to finish the job. This setback was only the beginning of a demolition process that took several months to complete. In 2019, the news that Amazon would build a warehouse on the site sealed the Silver Dome's fate, turning it into a distant memory. This incident highlights how, even with the most precise planning and the use of advanced technology, demolitions can be marred by unforeseen failures, requiring a flexible and adaptive approach to resolve issues on the spot. The Leaning Silo Tower in Brisbane, Australia. In Brisbane, Australia, a demolition team faced an unexpected challenge when they tried to demolish an old malt silo in 2010. The silo had been standing for over 50 years, and due to the need to transform the land for a new railway transportation project, its demolition was decided. However, the demolition team encountered a problem when the explosions did not bring down the structure as expected. At first, everything seemed to go according to plan. The silo began to collapse to one side, but suddenly it stopped, leaning at a dangerous angle. This was the result of not using the correct amount of explosives. According to the demolition company's manager, there is always an inherent risk. The line is very thin between using too many or too few explosives, and in this case, an insufficient amount had been used. Nearby residents found themselves facing a new leaning tower, unsure of exactly what would happen to the structure. However, demolition experts were not caught off guard and put a backup plan into action. After 40 minutes, during which the silo remained at an uncomfortable angle, the team proceeded to remove additional structural supports, and with a push from an excavator, the silo finally collapsed to the ground. Although the work didn't go as expected, the incident demonstrates how precision in the placement of explosives is crucial in a controlled demolition. After the silo's fall, cleanup began on the 4,400 tons of rubble, which also represented a large part of the work before the infrastructure project could begin on the site. The demolition of the two towers in Liverpool. In 2016, Liverpool was the site of an epic failure in the demolition of two iconic towers, Churchill House and Montgomery House, locally known as the Two Towers. Originally, the demolition was scheduled to be carried out in 3 phases, but the 14-story buildings did not cooperate as expected. The first demolition attempt at Churchill House was unsuccessful, as the explosives placed around the foundations failed to bring down the structure. The following day, the process was repeated, and this time, Churchill House fell as planned. However, Montgomery House remained standing, defying all expectations. The third attempt was also not entirely successful, as only a quarter of the tower collapsed. Faced with this unforeseen problem, the demolition team had to resort to a manual tactic to complete the job. Cables were tied around the tower to ensure its collapse, and cranes were used to dismantle the structure floor by floor. This process, much slower and more complicated than anticipated, took longer than expected, but the demolition was eventually completed. The situation shows that, although controlled explosions are a common technique in the demolition of large structures, unforeseen factors can extend a project and make it more labor-intensive than anticipated. The demolition of the feed mill tower in South Dakota. The feed mill tower, located in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, was one of the tallest structures in the region until its demolition in 2005. Although the demolition of the 202-foot tower was planned, the demolition plans did not take into account a crucial factor: the weight of the structure. The tower was incredibly heavy, resulting in an unplanned collapse. The demolition team cut the rebar and placed explosives around the base, but when detonated, only the base was destroyed. The rest of the building remained standing, leaning to one side and partially falling, but with the structure intact. The demolition team had not used enough explosives to compromise the tower's vertical integrity. Instead of resorting to more explosives, the decision was made to dismantle the tower layer by layer using a crane and a wrecking ball. This process, much slower and more complicated than the initial method, required a much more manual approach. Although there were no casualties, this situation highlights the importance of making precise calculations and considering the full structure of the building before beginning demolition work. Otherwise, efforts can be prolonged and complicated, as was the case here. The unexpected collapse of the condominium in Miami. In 2018, workers began preparing a condominium in Miami for demolition, unaware that the building was much weaker than the surveyors had anticipated. While placing the explosives, the building, known as Casa Marlboro, suddenly collapsed without the need for detonation. Witnesses reported that there were no explosions, only the sound of concrete crumbling. Fortunately, the residents had already been evacuated, and only one worker was injured. The investigation revealed that the cause of the sudden collapse was the cutting of support beams, a standard procedure in demolitions to ensure that the building falls in a controlled manner. However, in this case, those beams were all that kept the building standing, and once cut, the building collapsed immediately. This case demonstrates how dangerous it can be to cut structural elements without properly assessing their importance. Sometimes, what seems like a routine procedure can be the breaking point for an entire structure. Although this incident did not cause any fatalities, it emphasizes the importance of thorough study and having emergency planning in place for every demolition project. The demolition of the Angi power plant in Victoria, Australia. The Angi power plant in Victoria, Australia was a coal power plant that opened in 1969 and closed in 2014 due to decreasing demand and growing concerns about pollution. In 2018, the demolition process was underway and the main plant building was scheduled for demolition, while the chimney would be handled later. However, when the explosives were detonated, the result was not as expected. The bunker and conveyor fell, but the main structure remained standing. This was a major setback for the demolition company, as in addition to facing the difficulty of carrying out a second demolition, rumors began circulating that the structure contained asbestos, a highly dangerous material when released into the air. This risk of asbestos exposure forced the company to initiate a thorough investigation to determine whether the risk of air contamination was real. Fortunately, there were no major complications, but this incident highlights the need for specialized experts in the demolition of industrial structures, particularly when hazardous materials are potentially present. Demolition of the water tank in Bijapur, India. In Bijapur, India, on January 8, 2018, a group of locals attempted to demolish a large water tank using a Hitachi excavator. Although the demolition had been carefully planned, things did not go as expected. The plan was to remove the plaster from the pillars and then pull the tank down with a rope. However, the structure turned out to be much weaker than anticipated, leading to an unexpected and uncontrollable collapse. While the work was being done, the tower suddenly collapsed, falling directly onto the excavator working at the base of the structure. In the resulting chaos, locals screamed and ran for cover, fearing the excavator operator had been trapped under the debris. Fortunately, the operator managed to escape the incident unscathed, thanks to the strong cabin of the excavator, which provided effective protection during the collapse. However, the excavator was completely destroyed. This accident left a significant mark on the community, and many locals expressed their anger toward the government, questioning the planning of the demolition. The fact that no additional precautions had been taken to ensure safety during the collapse caused great concern. Despite the miracle that no one was injured, this event underscores the importance of proper planning and anticipating all potential unforeseen circumstances when demolishing large and old structures. Pollution in Little Village, Chicago. In Little Village, a neighborhood in Chicago, the community faced a critical situation in April 2020 due to the demolition of the Crawford Power Plant's Chimney. The plant had been operational for over 90 years, using coal for energy generation. After its closure in 2012, due to growing environmental concerns, the power plant finally reached the end of its operational life. However, the demolition of the chimney resulted in a disaster for nearby residents. Although the explosives were placed according to plan and the chimney fell as expected, what had not been adequately considered was the massive volume of dust and toxic debris released into the air. The dust cloud that formed when the chimney collapsed quickly enveloped the entire Little Village neighborhood, making it so thick that residents could barely see their own hands. The dust remained suspended in the air for an extended period, raising concerns, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Residents began to notice that the airborne particles contained hazardous materials such as asbestos, in addition to other chemicals that had accumulated in the chimney during decades of operation. Tests conducted after the event confirmed that these particles were toxic and could have adverse effects on respiratory health. This incident triggered a large number of questions about the management of the demolition. Why were no measures taken to minimize the dust or warn the community about the risks before the demolition? Why was the demolition allowed to proceed during a pandemic? The company responsible faced intense public criticism for failing to anticipate the consequences of the toxic dust cloud. Furthermore, it was questioned whether the demolition procedure could have been made safer and better managed to protect residents. This incident highlights the environmental risks that can arise from demolishing old industrial structures. Air pollution and exposure to hazardous materials must be taken much more seriously, especially in densely populated areas. The situation also underscores the need for risk assessments and for involving the community in the planning and execution of these large-scale projects. Building demolitions are impressive, but sometimes things don't go as planned. From water tanks collapsing onto excavators in Bijapur, India, to toxic dust clouds covering Little Village in Chicago, these incidents show us how important careful planning and safety precautions are. Although technology has advanced, demolition remains a risky process. Not everything always goes as expected, and it's vital that teams are prepared for any unforeseen circumstances. In the end, demolishing buildings is more than just destruction. It's about managing risks and protecting people. Thanks for watching this video, and see you next time.